It's all been very interesting, their data versus my data, and where in the end this will have us all end up, right? But teaching my readers to start to shop outside of brand to get me has been interesting. I changed all of my covers. I changed some of my descriptions. I mean, fonts, everything. I changed my website. I changed my pricing, all trying to signal it's okay. We're all the same. This is the whole Pamela. Huh?
Hello, fellow creative Voyagers. This week on the Indie Author Podcast, I talk with Pamela Fagan Hutchins about data-driven publishing, including business and creative collaboration with a publisher, the rise of super indie/alt-traditional, changing one's genres or plotting approach based on the data, battling imposter syndrome, the danger of violating reader expectations and the power of targeting the enthusiastic subgenre fan, and the value of writing between the bright lines. And now let's hear from Pamela Fagan Hutchins about data-driven publishing. Hello, and welcome to the Indie Author Podcast. Today, my guest is Pamela Fagan Hutchins. Hey, Pamela, how are you doing?
Hi, Matty. I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing great also. And to give our listeners and viewers a little bit of background on you, Pamela Fagan Hutchins is a USA Today bestselling and Amazon all-star mystery thriller suspense author who believes in soulmates, loves to laugh, and lives out the adventures in her books at a rustic lake camp in Maine's Moose Look Lake. And if you watched an earlier video, you'll know why I'm emphasizing Maine. And in an off-the-grid lodge in the face of Wyoming's Bighorn Mountains with her husband, sled dogs, and draft horses. And she was also recently a guest on my video series, What I Learned, where we talked about her book, Her Last Cry, and there I accidentally identified Moose Look Lake as in Minnesota. So apologies to Maine, one of my favorite states, for making that mistake.
Moose Look is such a small community, you offended very few people. A few hundred at most.
Well, still, I don't want to offend anyone in Maine as my second adoptive home there. So it was actually our conversation about Her Last Cry that led me to invite Pamela to the podcast, because we started talking about some changes to her publishing approach that I'm going to ask her to describe in a moment. And we wanted to talk about data-driven book creation. And so, Pamela, I just thought it would be useful to start right out, having you describe for our listeners, what was that big change that recently happened in your publishing approach?
Well, I'd gone from being a dyed-in-the-wool, rebellious, you can't control me indie for the last 12 years to signing a contract with Bookouture. They're with Hachette UK. And I think of them as, these are my words, not theirs. But what attracted me to them was I think of them as super indie or alt-traditional, as a digital publisher that is extremely driven by learning from data.
Yeah, I think that a Bookouture, I'm kind of a student of Bookouture, and one of the things that has led to is that I'm kind of struggling with a different way of representing indie versus traditional, because I don't think that's the case anymore. I just think that indies have learned so much, the professional indies have learned so much of the good stuff that the traditional publishing world has to offer, and the traditional publishers are starting to learn from what the indies are doing well, and I think Bookouture is a great example of an organization that's kind of tapping into the best of both worlds. So it's definitely a spectrum. It's not an either or, if it ever was. And I just think it's a fascinating company to follow. And you must have too.
I do too. And a mutual friend of ours is who I really got interested in it originally because of Lisa Reagan. And she was so happy with them. And so we started chatting and I thought, that sounds really smart. It sounded smart to me because it's what I'd been trying to do in a smaller way on my own for 12 years. And all of a sudden, here was someone doing it bigger on behalf of a large number of authors with some very successful books. And I just salivated after all that data. Like, how can you not want to be part of using good data to its highest and best ability? I only have a small amount of data compared to them. I want their data. And I don't get their data, but I get the use of their data. I get to learn from their data. And the other thing I really liked about them, I'll say, is that they allow their authors, first of all, they embrace authors from the indie space because they don't have any snobbery to it, right? There's no, oh, you're indie, you're dirty, we won't touch you. It's, can you write? Can you sell books? Okay, we can do something with that. I think that falls in what we do. So cool, let's all play together. And they encourage you to continue whatever is working for you outside their space as well. Multiple publishers, indie career, keep those going. Just don't step on each other's toes. We put together schedules and things that honor that with each other.
One of the things that I've really been impressed in my hearing, what I've heard and read about Book Tour is its willingness to pivot. And I think because it is a digital only or digital first
Only
company, that there are things they can do like changing up a cover if the first cover isn't working, and as opposed to, well, now I have 50,000 copies of this print book in a warehouse somewhere, and that's the cover that people are going to be seeing for the next decade, which
exactly.
I'm a big fan of.
Exactly. I think it's wonderful. I heard a friend of mine that was telling me early on, oh, don't, think twice about book couture because they'll change your cover on you at the last second. I was like, no, wait, that's what I like about them. I like
Yeah.
that they're willing to say we were wrong and we're going to do better in the long run by changing now than just letting this title not work after all the work that went into it, letting it not work as a vehicle to reach the hands of readers because of some antiquated notion of that's the cover forever. We will never change it because we shipped it from China. So look,
Yeah.
48,000 of its friends on a boat.
I'm surprised at that reaction. Was that reaction about watch out for them because they'll change your cover at the last minute? Like, did you have a sense of what was driving that reaction?
That it ruins publicity, that you have these moments
Oh,
to publicize, and that
got
cover
it.
reveal is one of them. And here you've done the cover reveal, you created the impressions, and now you're changing it out on people.
Right.
But frankly, as an indie, I've changed some of my book covers 5 times. I just keep playing with them and testing them through ads until I find what's working best right now. Usually a series lead, right? The rest of them don't matter as much. I want to hook them on that first book. And so with Saving Grace, which is the very first book in my What Doesn't Kill You super series, first book in Katie Connell series within that, and Switchback, which is my lead in my Patrick Flint's books, I've changed those covers over and over and over. I don't have anything tied to an identity with it or anything else. It's what's working now. When somebody hits that page, will make them say, that's the book I want to read, and
Yeah.
people say, we get it wrong, which is one of the reasons I wanted to work with somebody else, frankly, was because I felt like I was too emotionally invested in things like titles, descriptions, covers, and that was my weakness, that I felt like I could write good enough anyway, right? I can write good enough. And that was my weakness, is that I was the one calling those shots, and that maybe that needed to be more data-driven decision. So
There were a couple things that we talked about earlier that were places where your writer life changed as a result of partnering up with Book Tour. And I'm going to throw them out. We can take this conversation wherever. But one of the things that you had mentioned that was very interesting is not only, does an author obviously get tied to their cover and description and so on, but also their genre. And so one of the things that Book Tour asked you to do was to write a police procedural.
yeah.
Describe a little bit about where that request came from and what your reaction to it was.
But I had all these long, lovely conversations with the woman that is my editor now before I'd signed with them, where she'd say, great, we want to work with you. We love this book, but we'd like you to change it from X to Y, from what it is now to police procedural. And I kept saying, no, I don't think so. And at one point, I literally said to them, you know what? I'm going to go away for a year and we could talk again later, but I'm going to go ahead and write more books in this series because I believe in this book and I'm going to do it now. And they were like, wait. And let's talk again. And I thought we'd reached a point where it was going to be amateur sleuth again, because it was really an unconventional sleuth, I'm not a cozy writer, but an unconventional sleuth, meaning non-police. And somehow we ended up again with, I was going to start immediately and start police procedural, at which point my husband and I, who collaborate closely on both our careers, I am his other half in his career. He's my other half in mine. We said, if you're going to do this, let's just do it. You want to learn from them. You want to break yourself free of things that may be holding you back by working with them. Just go ahead and do it. And so I said yes, and immediately called our dear friend who's a police chief and said, help me. And he has.
So what was it specifically that was deterring you from pursuing the police procedural aspect?
That imposter syndrome, feeling like a fraud. I had been the things that were often at the helm or the protagonist's main career or avocation, whatever it was that stood out as their identity, I could identify with in my other books, either through a close family member or myself. And I felt I could write them with authority, and authenticity is really important to me, getting things right. And I had never been a cop. I've been a private investigator, but I've never been a cop. I've been a lawyer, but I've never been a cop. And I just was scared. And it turned out that with the help of others, that I could butcher that just as well as I did any of those other fields. So
And did your publisher provide any help in terms of getting you the information that you felt you needed, or was that really on you as the author to find the subject matter experts to tap into?
I never asked them to help me, so they might have, but I did it on my own and I told them what I was doing. I actually reached out to also the sheriff and the undersheriff in our county. The sheriff was wonderful, but it ended up I relied on the police chief more heavily, even though I was writing something that was more rural and was more, was a sheriff's department. But I found that the law enforcement people, most of them found it fun. Some were nervous, some were like, "Oh, don't tie my name to that." But I found just the right guy, one who's ready for me to crow his name and find him lots of writers to work with.
Yeah, as I often say on the podcast, it is fun to find those subject matter experts who know inside and out what happens in real life, but are willing to say, well, yeah, that normally wouldn't happen, but you could make it work if this.
Exactly.
Like, oh, I love you.
Yeah, there's nothing worse than the expert who says, but it just wouldn't happen. And you're like, can't or wouldn't? Wouldn't is good. Wouldn't is exactly where we're pushing to. We want something that is more exciting than every day.
Yes. Yes. If the books were all about what happens every day, then nobody would be reading them.
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, that was different for me, but I've enjoyed it. I'm on the 4th book in the series right now, and I'm feeling more confident about trusting my instincts and knowing we can fix it later, and saving some more questions for Travis, my consultant, until we're down the road.
And the we can fix it later is related to the details that you put in
Details.
about.
Yeah. And I want to strike a balance between my details being correct and not burdening a book with details. And I found that one of the things that's good about me never having been a cop is I don't feel burdened by the details. I want as little as possible so that we can keep the pace of the book up. And I'm not constrained by, but I need to include all this background and all this detail, et cetera, because to me, it's meaningless. I really think of it more like a reader. How do we get from point A to point B while doing it, correctly, but on the edge of vigilantism and not getting thrown in jail? So we don't get fired or thrown in jail today. It's roughly what a cop could and would do. And yet we get there fast enough to satisfy a reader who wants to read a thriller.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that the idea of what details do you leave out, I was at a talk that James McCrone gave at the Brandywine Valley Writers Group meeting last night. And I think he was quoting Keith Richards or maybe about songwriting, but it was, you're not done when you have nothing else to say. You're done when you've taken out everything you can.
Yeah.
To that effect. But I thought it was even if I'm butchering the quote, it was a great words to live by for authors.
I think that's fantastic. Yeah. It's one of the things that I do find challenging when I write books that are written more by people that are subject matter experts, is that it's harder for them. And the ones that have that expertise and can leave out enough are spectacular. That's what I want to aim toward.
Absolutely. So genre is obviously a pretty central thing that you were asked to change. But another really important thing that you were asked to change was your plotting approach. So can you describe what your plotting approach was before, what your publisher asked you to change it to, and how that change went for you?
My plotting approach was pretty much throw it all to the wall until it sticks and get there somehow. And I roughly was embracing a 3-act structure with, really it's a 5-act structure, an inciting incident. It's somewhere at, say, 15 to 20% of the way into the book. And then three major acts, and then an act 5, which is your ending, your denouement. And so that's how I looked at it. And I did a lot of work on these in the past. I would print all my pages out in 2-page, book format, tape them to the floor, go through with highlighters and look at continuity issues and see if I was dividing the acts up correctly. But in dividing the acts up correctly, what I wasn't thinking about was the midpoint of the book. And the midpoint of the book is the midpoint of the middle act. And I was thinking about beginning and the ends of acts and how do you get between those. And so when my first draft came in, they said, we really need a midpoint. And I'm like, talk to me about this midpoint. So they had me read a book called Into the Woods, and I'm going to forget who wrote it, even though I printed a couple of pages out from it.
John York.
Thank you, John York. So I read Into the Woods, and for the most part, I was going, yeah, this is what I do, until I got to the part about midpoint, which basically was, this is the point at which you move from that which you didn't know towards having some kind of explosion of knowledge or a change point that leads to, at the end, your acceptance of what you've discovered, your reawakening, your end point. And that's your big moment of key discovery, is right there at between 49 and 51%. Hit it right on the nose, Pamela. And I went through, and sure enough, for a crime thriller, I did not have that huge key discovery, which in a crime thriller, one would expect also to come with some whiz bang, right? Something at risk. Okay. So you want a lot to be at risk, so that the protagonist is pushed forward into the second half of the book, resolving whatever it is they've now discovered and can't avoid resolving. And I'd really always thought of it more as an inciting incident, and then you have an act, and an ending. And that whiz bang in the middle was missing. So I did that. The first structural edit was just a bitch. I mean, it was just awful. And then the second was good. And by the time we got to Her Last Cry, the third book in the series, my editor gave it a kiss and a hug and said, "By George, I think you've got it." And now I'm writing book 4, and literally last night, that's what I was doing, was looking at what I'd written so far, realizing I'd crusted what I intend to be the midpoint, and that I needed to revisit it before I moved on, because my key discovery was there, but I didn't have enough whiz bang. And so anyway, I went back and that's what I did this morning, was worked on my midpoint, because to me now I really think of the book in two halves, as the biggest structure. And then I obviously also think of it on all those little micro pieces as well.
I realized I want to loop back with the same question for genre, because I realized I kind of lost the thread of the data-driven thing. But I'm talking about the structure. Did you ever get a sense of what data your publisher or editor had that was leading them to push you so forcefully toward this structural approach?
No, I really don't know from a data perspective what they have that pushes them towards that point, other than that is their predominant theory of how you structure books, and that they sell a lot of books, and that when you master that they feel like that it pushes their readers through the book and into, whether it's buy through if they're buying the books, or read through if it's in Kindle Unlimited. So my suspicion was, and it's a question I didn't ask them actually, was that their data came from series writing and moving on to the next book. Because, somebody can buy your book and they could stop at 47% because it wasn't satisfying, or they can stop at 75% because you didn't show them a compelling enough reason to be pushed from this key discovery towards, the inevitable ending. So that was my feeling. The genre issue was much more clear. They were saying, our data shows that our readers prefer police procedural or crime fiction that has a law enforcement detective, usually law enforcement protagonist. And this isn't all readers, right? It's the readers they can reach. Their data, specific to them and who they have reached in the past. And as a result, keep expanding into selling more too for this particular portion of their business, because they have multiple genres. But for crime fiction, their data showed that they didn't do as well with amateur sleuths, except in the cozy space, and that they didn't do as well with what I was writing when I came to them, which was more of a legal thriller, and that just didn't translate to series that that really took off and were worth sticking around for a few more books for.
Well, I think it's interesting that this can be extrapolated on a more micro level for an individual indie author, that I don't think anybody has like a favorite publishing imprint, but Bookouture books are very distinctive looking.
Yes.
And, you can run through a montage of the top 100 Kindle books or top 100 selling ebooks, and you can kind of pick out which one the Bookouture books are. They're very heavily color saturated with like a natural scene with an object in it, like a barn or a boat or something like that.
Absolutely.
Like you can see them and oh, that's a book like this other book that I read and really liked. And I can imagine that there's the, using data because, you have a sense of what readers everywhere are looking for and you hone in on that. Or you kind of create your own data because if they've now trained book tour readers to recognize the books and then to expect that between 49 and 51%, there's going to be that midpoint moment,
Mhm.
then you're satisfying a reader expectation that you've created. A publisher can create an expectation among a
Yes.
pool of readers in a way that, maybe an indie author over many, 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 many books can do that, but you're exponentially expanding the expectation setting
I think that's a
possibility if
really,
you're doing it through a publisher.
but I think that's a really good point. When I reached books, I'm going to think back here, 12 through 15 in my What Doesn't Kill You Super series. It's actually, as I wrote it, it was probably 9 through 11, but I pushed them to the end of the series because they didn't perform well. And the reason that they didn't perform well, I'm convinced, is because I moved out of what I had set reader expectation to be. I took a character that one of my favorite characters. I think of the books. I personally think the books are great. Okay. I've said that about my own books. I think the books are great, but they were not what readers had come to expect from my protagonist in my first few times to give protagonists their turns at bat. And the sales showed that. And 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 to take that another step further, by doing this with Bookouture, I've taken 2-year chunk out of what I'm doing, right? Because I'm on books 4 through 6 with them right now. And I'm not meeting reader expectations, right? Because I was writing amateur sleuth. My covers looked like my covers looked like. There were no serial killers. There were, but they didn't get a point of view. This is a very big difference, by the way, in this genre they've asked me to write versus what I was writing. I still had multiple murders in my books. I mean, people are dying left and right, but I never did the victim or the antagonist, the nasty bad guy point of view in my books. And so Bookouture's brands their crime fiction towards what their data shows them is the way into brand it that will reach the most readers, their readers, and hopefully additional readers. And that brand doesn't necessarily match what reaches mine. And so it's been a struggle for my readers to realize that these are A, my books, and B, they should be their books. Even though when you open them up, they're still a Pamela Fagan Hutchins books, very character driven. You're going to fall in love with this kick-ass protagonist, and there's not glorification of serial killers and people aren't getting mutilated on the page, right? But that isn't so clear to them from the brand. So it's all been very interesting, their data versus my data, and where in the end this will have us all end up, right? But teaching my readers to start to shop outside of brand to get me has been interesting. I changed all my covers. I changed some of my descriptions. I mean, fonts, everything. I changed my website. I changed my pricing, all trying to signal it's okay. We're all the same. This is the whole Pamela. But it was an interesting shift, and we're not there yet.
Did you alert your publisher that you were, I'm assuming, making changes in your independently published books to make them visually more similar to theirs?
Yeah.
Were they concerned about that at all?
No, what they want is I have over 3 million books out there in people's hands before I stepped in my role with them. They wanted those readers to come with me at the same time as they wanted their readers to embrace me. And so what they didn't want and what is contractually prohibited is for me to release books 45 days before or after they release one of my books so that our advertising and things don't step on each other. Our major advertising pushes, it's impossible to not have them somewhat because you always have to be doing something for your indie books or they'll die and wither and you'll never get it back. But that was something that they were just like, whatever you can do to bring your people along. We coordinated on newsletters. I have not a huge list, but I have 15,000 newsletter lists. And how do I bring them along? What does it look like for you with authors with medium to big lists when we coordinate with what you're sending out? Coordinating on advertising. When they're advertising, what do I do? Et cetera. All of that, we've been trying to signal it's okay to my readers. These serial killers aren't going to get you. That the thing. And so they've been real cooperative with that, and they're very open when they think they don't want me to do something. Please don't do X or please don't do Y. They may not love everything that I do, but I know that, for instance, they do have some of us because some of us bridge indie and this new world of digital publishing, which is, quasi indie or alt traditional, whatever. We get way more into their business on this than their other authors do. The ones that come from traditional are like, okay, you'll take care of it. And I'm like, what were the numbers like? I literally woke up last night. There's a price promo running on book 2 in the series, and the rank tanked and went backwards for 24 hours. And so I wrote a letter to my editor saying, what happened? What didn't scale? That really is concerning. Can't pivot on this very fast. And then I didn't send it because I know they know that. But it's my first inclination is like, if it were me and I was controlling this advertising campaign and I was upping the spend and it went 1,000 points in the wrong direction, I'd say I had the wrong audience. But I've already told them that, so they know.
But so when in other circumstances where maybe you've sent the email or you've talked through it with them, have there been other circumstances, and how does that interaction with them work, where they have one group of authors who are saying you take care of it and the second group of probably indie authors who want to be more involved in it? What has been your experience with how they receive that?
They're so polite, first of all, because they're British. So I'm not really sure what they really think of me. But when I say, I'm so sorry, I know that I hear a whole lot about this, maybe more than your other authors. And here's why. They've actually invited me to give them more feedback, and it caught them in some boo-boos. I mean, they're not perfect. They're humans. And we had some things that on the first promo they didn't go real well. And then when they finished it, they said, what would you have done differently? And literally got on the phone with me and said, what is it that you see that may have gone wrong here? What can we learn from this? Because you're right, this didn't go like we expected. And it was nice to have that conversation. And so, yeah, the second one is going better, notwithstanding me wanting to send that email this morning, but going much better. I think they were having like a 35% conversion rate on people who clicked on the ads. So they were like really excited about that was 10 points better than their normal conversion. So I think that when you do work together, especially when you're trying to combine audiences, if you will, they want my audience, I want theirs, or they want my readers, I want theirs. How an audience is probably the wrong word. I'm thinking in terms of ads, which is audience, but at the end of the day, those are readers. And when we're trying to strategize on how to find the readers that are going to love this book out of their readers and my readers and the whole world of readers and collaborate on it, that's been nice. I didn't expect it. They also changed my covers when I didn't think that they were going to work. And I was told never to expect that they would ever change a cover. And they changed all 3 of them. And I wasn't ugly or anything. I was just like, those are barns in Kansas. And these books are set in Wyoming. And honestly, those aren't the same places, And they were like, okay, you're right. We really looked at this too much from America perspective and not what really shows the ruggedness of these books. So they changed them all. I thought that was cool.
So any publisher is probably going to have more data than any individual independent author. Did you feel that the areas where you were able to bring more value in terms of maybe correcting some misdirection were more personal, or because of reader interaction, or, you're not tapping into a giant database? So where did you have the edge in those conversations?
I have a lot of engagement with readers. And while you can't take what any one person says, a lot of times if you get a couple of people that say something in different places, they're representing a large number of people, right? They're just the ones that spoke up. And so if I get a couple of data points spread out over different platforms, I start to think they're saying something here and I should listen. And I started getting people saying, I'm so glad I read your book. I really was afraid that it was a serial killer book, and I was really afraid to read it. And so Bookouture was saying, your pre-orders were fantastic. They were the best we've had in a very long time for a new series. And then we didn't get the sales we thought we'd get once the books launched. Do you have a feeling for why? And I said, I don't think my readers are coming to the party. And I don't think they're coming to the party because of something that I don't think you're going to change. But it's the description of the book. It's what it says on the page is the book. It doesn't read like what they're used to reading. they're trying to please the hardcore, crime thriller readers, and my readers are trying to move to crime thriller from where I had them. And you open the book and it's a combination of crime thriller and Pamela Fagan Hutchins. And my readers are happy, but some of them are scared. And so I think we're getting late adopters. And so we're trying to figure out how we bring my people along at the same time as we bring the world along with it. So
Yeah.
it's going to be hit or miss. And the conversation between us was very much, what would you be doing differently? How would you adjust your audience? We were talking ads, basically. What would you be looking for? And I was able to come back to him a day later and say that feeling I had that the ads weren't reaching the right readers when you did the price promo. They did a 99-cent price promo. They did heavy Facebook advertising with it. They were using their proprietary ad groups for the most part. And the day after the promo finished, all my also bots on the series were British-based crime drama. And that's not who's going to ultimately fan me, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I'm more the CJ Box, Craig Johnson, Jeff Carson, DK Hood, the people that write Mountain West, basically, if you will, rural, rugged, et cetera. And I said, this is who Amazon is telling me responded to your ads. And that to me says that's who receives your ads. And if I was looking at what to do differently, I'd be thinking long-term, which is, are these going to be devoted fans of these books? And you haven't convinced me that the answer is yes yet. So that's what I'd be looking at is, are we reaching the right people?
Yeah. That's interesting because that's data that anybody can have access to. You don't need a giant corporate database to do that.
Exactly. Look at your also bots the day after after you run a promo, you've got more data than you're ever going to have. But a lot of it disappears very quickly, right? I mean, those change every single day. And so it's a matter of, not for vanity, but for learning purposes, getting on and looking at your own data while it's hot. Well, it's there because it's going to go away. I mean, I look at things like rank every single day for my top 6 books, my series leads and my new releases, just because it's an indicator of what's happening. But looking at those also bots right after, big promo. So
Yeah.
that says who bought your book. It's the closest you're ever going to get to knowing with Amazon.
Yeah. Well, any conversation about reader targeting that I've ever heard assumes that if you're writing cozies, then you're finding the people who just read all cozies all the time. If you have like some very niche romance or whatever, you're looking for those people. But I've got to believe that there are a lot of readers out there that are like me who read, like, one day I'm reading, kind of chick lit books, and the next day I'm reading nonfiction history, and the next day I'm reading some kind of sci-fi series, the next day I'm reading a police procedural. And I feel like an organization like a successful publisher who has access to all this data and has been able to look across their experience for years and years is almost incented to say, what we're going for are the people who read CJ Box, but not Leanne Moriarty, But whereas in reality, I think that there's a lot more overlap in real life than any publisher, indie or traditional, is allowing. Do you feel like an organization like Bookouture has a better chance of tapping into those? Well, first of all, you can tell me whether you agree with my assessment. And then second, do you think that an indie author or a publisher is better positioned to tap into readers who have a wider reading interest?
I think that for an indie author that's been at it for a while, you're going to have potentially a better ability to tap into that wider interest because you're doing it specifically to your books as opposed to a group of books where, if anything, you're getting more and more granular. You're trying to group the books together. You're trying to group the readers together. I do agree that people read broadly, but I've always found with advertising that your best conversion, you're looking for your best converter. You're looking for somebody that sees your image and your copy and there's no hesitation. This is for me, right? And so I think a lot of times when I'm pointing my advertising, at least, I'm looking for the super fans of the genre, the super fans of what I write, and then hoping that through their recommendations and their reviews that they bring other people along with them. But I'm looking for the most efficacious, is that the right word? Efficient, that's a better word, use of my spend. So I agree with you. And I would say when targeting, I'd be targeting.
Yeah. It is
Boom.
always tough to distinguish the marketing targeting from the creative process because I know that I limit my own ability to reach readers because I have to write the things that are of interest to me, not necessarily the things that I think will do best in the market. And
Yeah.
so, if I could train my creative brain more to be more disciplined in that way, I'd probably be doing better. But on the other hand, I probably wouldn't be writing books. So
Yeah.
it doesn't
Well, and
matter.
I did the same thing when I sat down to write this series for Bookouture. I first wanted to make the protagonist an MMA fighter. I wanted her to be really badass, and it just interested me at the moment. And they were like, "Our data says that women that actually physically fight in an organized fashion are eternal. On the other hand, she can still kick some ass if she wants to, but it needs to not be in an official capacity." And first, I had my little feelings hurt. And then I realized I had other things that interested me. But had I been writing that book on my own, I might have just run with that. I might have said, that interests me right now. I'm going to see what I can do with that with a really, really badass woman. And
Yeah.
instead, I went a different direction. So it's been interesting to me because it's trained me to work a little bit more between some lines, some pretty bright lines, whereas before my lines were pretty dim and fuzzy and wherever I wanted to be. And if I wanted to write a series of books that did terrible, which I've done before, then I can do that. And I can waste 2 years. It's never a waste, right? We always get better. Somebody loves those books and
That's right.
they become the body of work.
And I don't think that there's that much difference between an exercise, well, except for the time you're spending on it. There's not that much time between an exercise where you're saying, I'm going to write a really great story in 150 words. I mean, that's a really interesting and to me intriguing exercise.
Yeah.
Maybe I don't want to spend a year writing the 80,000 word version of that, but those guidelines can be restricting, but they can also be sort of empowering in the sense that it's focusing your attention in a way it otherwise wouldn't be focused.
Yeah, I agree with that. And at some point, you have to decide why you're writing too. And by what I mean, by that is, if you're writing for yourself, then you should write whatever you want all the time. If you're trying to sell your books, then you need some kind of idea of who you're writing to and what they like to read. And thus that creates, even if we don't like to think of that, some guideposts for you. It may be that you're unconscious of them and you aim toward it just out of affinity with your readers, and that's fantastic, but they're still there. If you are writing towards it being a commercial venture, as opposed to, I'm doing this for me and I don't care if it sells. I just love it. I live to write.
Yeah.
I'm trying to make money. I mean, I'll be
Yeah.
honest, because I gave up my day job. I'm trying to make money. So at first it felt a little bit limiting, and then I embraced it because I embraced data. It's like, this is a learning experiment, and it either works out or it doesn't. But either way, I'm better for it, having gone down this road. And that's really how I look at it. If it all ends tomorrow and I don't write another word for them, I'm a better author, an indie author, and business person in the world of publishing than I was before, because I've been exposed to a new way to do it and have that to consider and potentially inculcate to what I do.
Great. I actually could think of other questions, but that is such a nice wrap up. I think that I'm going to go with that. Pamela, it's always so much fun to talk with you. And I appreciate so much you sharing the kind of the behind the scenes inside scoop of what your experience has been making this transition. So please let the listeners and the viewers know where they can go to find all your books, regardless of who publishes them, online.
All right, I can do that. PamelaFaganHutchins.com will point you in the right direction. My Bookouture books, the new series, Detective Delaney Pace, is only available in Kindle ebook form on Amazon, although the paperback and audio versions are available anywhere that you can order your books. Bookouture is a digital-only company. They do partner with print providers that stock bookstores and things like that, but anywhere online. My books are available everywhere online. We're not exclusive to Amazon with those anymore, so you can get them anywhere. And the best place to interact with me, and I encourage you to do it, talk books, whatever, talk publishing, dogs, is Facebook. I have a Facebook page and a Facebook group, and that's where I'm really most active.
You do have a super fun Facebook feed, so I'll just put another plug in for that.
It's always nice to see the Matty come up on there.
Good. Well, Pamela, thank you so much. It's been so much fun to talk with you.
You too. Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Pamela. How do you think you'd react to a publisher making the kinds of requests of you that Bookouture made of her? I would love to hear your thoughts. Just leave a comment on YouTube and please subscribe while you're there. And if you got value from this episode and were thinking, I wish I could buy Matty a cup of coffee, you can do that. Scroll to the bottom of any page at theindieauthor.com and click Buy Me a Coffee to make a small contribution via PayPal or Stripe. Until next time, here's wishing you favorable winds and smooth sailing on your creative voyage.